morning. I'm Ken Kirschenbaum. Thanks for attending our webinar on valuing your alarm business. This webinar is going to focus on, one second, that's Dennis calling in, I'm pretty sure. We're having some technical problems with our panelists checking in, but we're going to get started because I'm going to be giving the first part of the presentation anyway. Today, we're going to be talking about valuing RMR, which is the traditional way of valuing alarm companies. There is going to be other webinars that are going to deal with valuing the non-RMR part of your business, and that'll be discussing EBITDA and enterprise value and the integration side of your business, seeing whether we can squeeze a few more bucks out of the valuation process, because traditionally the purchase price or sale price of an alarm company is strictly RMR. Very little attention is given to any other aspect. Criteria for arriving at RMR valuation has various categories that we look to. By the way, I'm not going to read through my webinar. When I prepared it, I did prepare it in sort of a speech mode, but you'll be able to access this webinar after today. We'll be sending out the link for it. You'll be able to listen to it or read it. So I'm not going to just read this to you. You'll be able to do that on your own later. So there's various categories for figuring out what RMR valuation we're going to assign to particular accounts. And we deal with all the different categories which you know about already. There's residential and commercial. There's fire systems, intrusion systems, other types of different systems that are installed. There's also different types of services that are provided. There's repair service, monitoring service, inspection, providing remote access, issuing UL certificates, there's guard service, runner service. So all of these different items of service that you are contracting for on an RMR basis is calculated as when we evaluate how to arrive at what your company might be worth and what those accounts might be worth. One of the advantages of using the all-in-one contracts that I offer is that we break down all of these services separately right in the contract, and they're broken down in the first instance by identifying them and then calling for the monthly charge you're going to be imposing for each one of those services you're providing. And then in the contract we go on to discuss and explain what each of those services are. So I mean, one of the things that, for example, that I think, I'm sure, is very non-traditional in contracts is a charge for ECV, electronic call verification. In a lot of jurisdictions, ECV is required in one form or another, whether it's telephone calls to the premises or a video clip provided by VideoFide or some other form of video confirmation. And the central stations, if they're not charging for that already, probably will start, and you can be charging for it when you sign up your customers and explain to them that this is something that you're going to be providing, whether it's required or not, and you're charging for it. Same with remote access. Some remote access is set up through manufacturers' servers, and there is a charge which you incur, so you certainly want to pass that along. Other remote access, I think, can be set up through the Internet, so that if the subscriber has an internet IP address, they can get their own access somehow without possibly going through a manufacturer's server. But in any event, you're still setting this up, and you can charge separately for it. So all of these different charges are calculated when we determine what price is appropriate for a sale. The calculation is dependent on all the different categories being merged together in some way, and we sort of then arrive at a figure, and that figure can be a wide range. Accounts that are deemed less valuable could sell as low as 12 times if they can sell it all. Accounts that are deemed very valuable can go for 45 times or more. So you see that there's a very wide range in how these accounts are looked at and evaluated, and of course you're going to hear from some experts in a little while to explain to you exactly how they view that evaluation when they make recommendations to the people that they do business with. My end of the business, of course, as you know, is contracts, and contracts can affect the valuation of RMR, and I think that the range can be anywhere from 5 to 10 times depending on the use of a proper contract. Of course, no contract at all brings you down to 12 times or less in your valuation, so you need to keep an eye on that. Execution of the contracts is, of course, an also important factor when you consider valuation. Not getting subscribers to sign contracts properly, not using 3-day notice of cancellation, not getting a husband and wife to sign. All of these things detract from the value of your accounts. We're going to hear today from people that explain how they arrive at it from different perspectives. Barry's going to be discussing it from his end, and Dennis from his end, and Ron Davis, of course, has another perspective. And Jim Worcester, did he sign on yet? Jim, you're there? Okay, that's good. We're going to look you in a little while. So I don't want to take too much of time today for myself. As I said, read through my presentation, and I have certain things that I've made, my opinion, such as commercial accounts and having the highest valuation, fire being more valuable than intrusion. But you'll see these things when you look through this presentation, when you have a little bit more time to do so. You can also get an evaluation of your business by going online and going what's my alarm company worth, and I provide that valuation, quick valuation for $80 all the way up, and for $9.50 we give a more comprehensive explanation. Of course, that's the web page that you're going to, and you'd be selecting which valuation that you wanted. And of course, you're familiar with our order form for our contracts, I hope. And if you don't have the all-in-ones, you should get them right away. The residential, commercial, and fire all-in-ones are essential items if you're going to be doing that kind of work. Okay. I'm going to now introduce Barry Epstein, who's going to making his presentation.
Thank you,
Barry,
Ken.
you're up. Barry, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I appreciate it. What we're going to talk about in this segment is two things, which is what affects your overall valuation and why it's so important if you're going to sell to have sell-side representation. Next slide, please. The next slide. Ken? There you go. So Vertex Capital, our company represents sellers throughout the alarm industry and buyers, and we represent companies from all over the country and throughout the life safety spectrum, including mostly monitoring companies, but also integration, guard companies, fire sprinkler, and medical alerts. Ken, am I on?
Yeah, you're on.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So the question that comes up is, what affects your valuation? And there's two main areas. The first one is the external market conditions, which you really can't control, but you can time when you want to sell. And the second one is the company-specific conditions, which you can affect greatly and which helps maximize what you're going to be selling for. Next slide. Next one. In the external market conditions, these are the things that are driving the market right now. If you look at the SDM 100, even the SDM 20, over half of the companies are private equity backed. That's what's fueling the market. They like getting in the industry. They like the diversification. They like the recurring revenue, the fact they can get in and out. And when you add that to the ease of borrowing, because the banks are happy to lend to these buyers with all this equity underneath, they go find operators that back them, and they've got to grow in order to flip it in 5 or 7 years. So they have a big appetite for alarm companies, which really makes it great for the sellers in terms of price, terms, and structure. The other factor is the interest rates. Right now they're obviously at historical lows, but they're starting to creep up. As long as they're low, the multiples will be higher, and as they move up, they start coming down because you've got to put some of that buyer money into paying the bank higher interest rates instead of putting it into the seller's pocket. Regarding the specific conditions, when people call us and they want to sell, the first two questions we always ask them are, do you have your phone, or do you have segregated phone lines, and do you have contracts? If you don't have those two, your odds of selling go down tremendously, and the number of buyers that will look at you go down tremendously. They want to be able to swing their phone lines, and they want liability limited with regard to their risk of if there's an incident. So if you've got the phone lines and the contracts, those are the main two things. The third one is the attrition. If you're 10% or under, you're just fine. If you're in that 12 to 14 range, they start getting nervous, adding extra terms. And if you're in the high teens or more, often they will just simply walk away. There's a lot of ways that you can calculate attrition. If you contact me after this meeting, I'll give you some of the easier ways to do it so you can manage it, so that you can keep this thing low, so that you'll have a better opportunity of getting the higher multiples. The fourth one is whether you're an S Corp, LLC, or C Corp. The buyers want to buy assets. The S Corp and the LLC allows them and you to do so. Those are the ones that are the easy deals to get done. The C Corps, we do them. They're much harder. Your buyers might go from 7 or 8 down to 2 or 3 because you want a stock deal and they've got to worry about their liability risk. So if you're in the S Corp or LLC, that's the easy one, and the others are easy to be done. Next slide. Next, okay. The location is the one thing you can't change, but the buyers go to where the populations are. So an alarm company in southeast Florida is going to sell for more than one in Omaha, Nebraska. It's simply because of the number of bidders you're going to have. The number of bidders is, if you have these earlier items, your number of bidders will go up, and your transaction, the ability for you to get what you're looking for is a lot higher. And the last one, which is on this next page, is the different ways that companies are sold. The simplest way is when the accounts, when you have 500, 1,000, or 5,000 accounts, you're going and just selling the accounts to the account buyers. The second one is when they're adding balance sheet items, such as inventory of vehicles, receivables, etc. And the third one happens a lot more frequently now, where the sellers tell us, we've been around for 20 years, we're not going to get all the money and let all our people be out of jobs, so find me somebody that will keep the office and keep the people. And that way we've got, they win and we win also. So it depends on which type of buyer you look at, whether or not you want the first, second, or third of these. Next. There's a quote which is a real truism in our industry, which is, it's simply not possible for a seller who looks locally or in the trade mags, the back of SDM, etc., to ever come close to the deal that a representative can get them. He doesn't have the market knowledge to know what's out there. Next page. And so if you're going to sell your company and you're going to sell it once, you really owe it to you, your family, etc., to have a sell-side representative. You know, a guy that's going to, say a dealer's in New Jersey and he wants to sell and he's going to talk to his local people, he's going to talk to the people in the trade mags. A sell-side representative will have 24 buyers around the country, some which will want commercial, some residential, some want different parts. There's different, but by the end of the day, they'll have 5 or 6 guys he could never have found that will offer him the opportunity to sell his company to them. That will lead to the auction process. Well, can you go back one page? Thank you. That goes to the auction process, which allows you multiple buyers with different scenarios. One guy might want you to stay on, another one might want you to leave immediately, another one might want you to stay for 2 or 3 years. Everyone, when you have these different options, you have a lot better chance of getting what you're ultimately looking for. The representative will take the emotion out because he's not affected as much as you are, and he knows what the buyers can do. You know, a buyer will tell you can only go so far, but if your representative's done 3 or 4, I mean, we've done deals where we've done 4 or 5 deals with a buyer. We know where he can go farther than where he can say he can go, both in terms of price and terms, and that will get you a lot farther. Every year we do at least one deal where the highest price is not chosen. And you think, because when the buyers call us, they say, well, what's the multiple? But at the end of the day, if one guy is the highest multiple and the second one is a slightly lower multiple, but he'll keep the people, or he'll do a much lower holdback. There's a lot of areas where the package matters more than just the highest multiple. And last slide. So in summary, you can affect most of the variables involving the sale of your company. Whether you're going to sell now, in a year, or in 5 years, you need to be doing the things that optimize your company's value so that at any point in time you can realize it. And the sell-side representative that you end up using will maximize it both in terms of the price, the terms, and the structure of the whole transaction. With that, I thank you very much, and I think Dennis is up next.
Wait, Barry, before we go to Dennis,
yes.
Let me ask you something, because we got some questions in. What are the factors Dennis, 1 second. What are the factors that bring multiple buyers to the process?
The main factors that bring multiple buyers to the process are: do you have dedicated phone lines? Do you have contracts? And is your attrition kind of in that 11-12% or lower? If you have all 3 of those, we can find you multiple buyers throughout the country because that fits what they're all looking for.
All right. One other question: How do these alarm guys go about selecting the right person to represent them in the sale of this company?
Right. So what you want to do is find someone that has done a lot of deals in your size range. And the other thing is that you want someone that will align their interest with you. In other words, you want it to be, if you want to keep the people, you don't want them selling an account buyer. You want them going throughout the process, showing the buyers the way you want the deal structured, and finally using Ken as the lawyer on the deal.
Right, I'm glad you recommended that. Okay, we're going to be going to Dennis now. Dennis, are you still there?
Unmute Dennis. Unmute Dennis.
Let her do it. Dennis, are you there?
I think I was just unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You're broadcasting. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Well, on behalf of my partner, I appreciate Barry's endorsement. I thought it was a little short since there's 2 of us who can do this. But moving right along, on the first slide, which I can't see, so I think, the question, the things Barry said all make a lot of good sense. The one, especially, people don't realize, and maybe Barry didn't focus on it, that you need 2 people to help you. One is a broker, and the other one is an attorney who is experienced in doing transactional work. That will help you maximize the price, and not only that, it will help you get it done properly. It is truly amazing to me how many people have built up the company over the years, which is their most valuable asset, then go out and try to do it on their own or use, the local attorney or a local business broker who has no idea about this industry to market their valuable product. So much for the preaching. In terms of the overall valuation, again, it depends whose side you're looking on, buyers or sellers. But recurring monthly revenue is still the kind of gem in our business. A lot of equity players are attracted to it, and that's what's given a lot of heat to the market. But it's a question of, as was mentioned before, one of the critical items is the contracts. And how you view RMR also is affected by what do you include in the purchase price. And that's one reason you need some professional guidance on this, because some people view it, this is my RMR, I multiply it by, hopefully a 40 multiple or more, and I'm just selling you the accounts. Now, if you want the inventory, if you want the vehicles, etc., you're going to pay extra for that. The buyer's expectation is, I'm paying you a multiple based on the recurring. That's to buy your operation. I'm not just buying accounts. So that's where you get into a lot of the back and forth negotiations, and which ultimately winds up hopefully in the letter of intent. And you have to be very careful, because things that aren't said in the letter of intent, even though the letter of intent, they're all non-binding, once it's written, depending which side of the argument you are on, somebody will tell you, well, it says that in the letter of intent, so you can't change it because you agreed to it. The fact that it's non-binding doesn't register with them because they take the opposite position. So you got to be very careful. Once you have a letter of intent, a lot of what is said in there is in concrete. So you've got to focus on, what does that multiple mean? Does it include all my assets, my inventory, my vehicles? So that you can really understand what the multiple is, because multiples can be determined very differently. Just like Barry mentioned, he can show you a way to do attrition. In our industry, as you know, attrition is done in many very strange ways. People come up with multiples on the same basis. Having said that, the RMR is a good initial yardstick for getting a flavor of where the value of the company is. Certainly in larger transactions, and a lot of it is being driven by equity money, those folks, because they are more maybe financially sophisticated, if you will, or used to dealing at a very different financial level, they tend to look at the value of a company on an EBITDA basis, which is the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And there you have different multiples. 4 to 6 is kind of standard. If you have a good company, however you define that, that gets you into the higher multiples. But even they ultimately still also take a look at what the RMR multiple is. So the RMR is still in this base, in this day and age, really the way to measure values of a company. One of the things that's very important and people tend to overlook is, each deal is unique. So for some of the factors that were mentioned before, that may drive a higher multiple. The other thing is location and size are very important. You may hear of deals, in the mid-40s, but those are deals with a lot of RMR. So if you have 30,000 of RMR, you're not likely, unless you have a very good broker and attorney working for you, likely to get the same multiple as somebody who has 150,000 of RMR. Sometimes that gets overlooked, and then people have unrealistic expectations. On the next slide, in terms of, the RMR pyramid, clearly at the top of that pyramid is central station monitored accounts, because they have the greatest margin. If you have your own monitoring center and you run a good monitoring center, your margin on that should be somewhere in the 75 to 85% range, and that is very attractive not only to strategics but also to the financial buyers. one of the things that goes along with that is that you have an appropriate standard industry type of contract. And how am I doing time-wise, Ken? Anyway,
another couple of minutes.
the important to have those standard contracts for liability issues, but also people like to see some longevity in contracts, some terms, especially if you're a financial buyer. Well, I'll take that back. If you are financial or strategic, but you get financed by one of the banks that services this industry, they all at least require a 1-year automatic renewal contract. Because I recently heard about a case where somebody thought selling contracts on, that were based just on a pure month-to-month basis was an excellent way to go. It's not. So people do look at the contracts. They do look at the initial term, even if the initial term has expired. But if it's a 3-year or 5-year term and that customer has been with you for that length of time, that's a good indication that they will probably stay around for a while. It's also a good indication the company's probably rendering good service. Otherwise, that customer probably would have bailed out. So to Ken's earlier point, when people look at companies, they look at what kind of contracts you have. And I can assure you, when it's one of the contracts that Ken has put together, there are very few questions during the due diligence about the contract. Buyers take great confidence in that because they know it has covered everything, including the kitchen sink. So if you aren't using standard contracts, definitely should. The top of the standard contract is the one the firm offers. Go to the website, order it today, and start using it. It will help you if you're looking down the road to sell. So aside from the RMR issue, you have contracted repair service. That carries a multiple generally lower than the RMR multiple because the margins aren't there, because it needs a lot more. There's a lot more cost involved in doing a service run than just monitoring an account. Having said that, a lot depends on the negotiations, how much of the book of business is contracted service revenue. If it's a small piece, maybe the RMR multiple carries a cost. If it's a large piece, you're going to get a pushback from sophisticated buyers who are not going to want to pay the same multiple. Same on contracted test and inspection, lower margin, therefore the expectation should be for a lower multiple. Again, if it's a small piece of the business, maybe not. If it's a larger piece, people are going to focus on it. The last item is when you have non-contracted service, which, by the way, should never be monitoring. Never, under any circumstances, should you do monitoring without a contract. But, you know, time and material service and test and inspection, which also really should be done under a contract because of the liability exposure there. But T&Ms are usually done on a service ticket, and there's value there. Most buyers don't focus on that. Question is, and I've done transactions where we've gotten some value for it because you can show, if you can show that you have, you know, $12,000 a month of T&M for the last 3 or 4 years, the expectation is that that is a real recurring source of revenue, even though non-contracted. The multiple will be significantly lower, especially if the buyer needs bank financing, because the bank is not going to credit that to his account at all. If you can't get a multiple, there are other things you can trade off for that. Maybe you get some credit against cancellations because it is a regular and recurring stream of business. The factors that influence the RMR multiple, clearly, I think the top of the ladder is the cancellation rate. If you have a high cancellation rate, certainly above 12%, you're going to have a tough time. The lower the cancellation rate, the better opportunity you have in the negotiating process to push for a higher multiple. You know, a company that has a 4 or 5% attrition rate definitely is going to be able to push for the higher multiple. If you're up at 10 or 11%, you know, there's nothing you can really tout with that. I mean, that's standard. It's okay. It's not great. The account mix is very important, depending on your buyer, whether it's residential, commercial. And the question about fire, fire installation, inspection, test is really the sweet spot of the RMR world because cancellations tend to be lower. And this is the recession resistant part of the business, because even when business is turned down, if you have a large warehouse, it may be empty, you may not have a tenant, but your insurance company is going to require you to keep your fire there. So fire is really a big plus. If you're third-party monitored, as Barry mentioned, critical that you own your own lines. If you don't, that is a tremendous hurdle. If you have some accounts that are unmonitored on your own lines, that may be all right. If you get too many, buyers will expect you to reimburse them for the cost of site visits and swinging the line. So if you have any accounts that are not on your own line, now's the time to get them on your own 800 line. Very important. The other thing with your third-party monitoring contract, you need to take a look and see. Some of them have a clause in there that the third-party company has a right of first refusal on any sale of accounts. That is a big negative. Nobody wants to give you a bid and then find out that, well, before you can accept, you got to go and shop it, if you will, with your third-party monitoring company. So take a look at your third-party monitoring company contract. If they have that kind of language, time to talk to them about renegotiating that, okay? In general, overall company performance matters. They will take a look at how much of the business comes through referrals. If a high percentage of your business is from referrals, that indicates you've got yourself a pretty good company. Again, that is all in the mix of how you arrive at the numbers. So, since I'm sure I've run over time, the bottom line is if you start off with an RMR figure and then it can get adjusted and tweaked, which is one reason you should definitely be represented by a broker and an attorney in this industry. And if you're contemplating selling down the road, probably wouldn't be bad to have somebody come in and do a preliminary due diligence review and point out things that need fixing. That's it for me. Thank you very much. Appreciate your attention.
Dennis, while we're setting up for Ron, let me just ask you some questions that came in. Are there any other items? Are there any other items included in the RMR evaluation, such as work in progress, executed new sales contracts in the installation pipeline?
Right, and this goes back to my earlier comment. You talk about RMR and times the multiple. The fact is, in the negotiations, you start looking at a lot of things, and this is where the view of buyer and seller don't always match. To my mind, if you're getting a good multiple, clearly sales contracts in process where they've been signed, nothing has been done beyond that. I expect when I buy a company and pay a good price for it, that it's alive and kicking. And alive and kicking means, yes, you have sales ongoing. That's part of what I expect to get. And
Dennis, let me ask you this. How's valuation for related businesses like home video or patrol business?
Well, that really depends on the buyer. I will tell you, it's not always a plus, okay? Certainly the video is probably more. Patrol is definitely a negative because you're not going to find a lot of companies that are willing to take that on. So your arena for buyers is much more limited. Similarly with the other, if it's too much of a service away from the basic security, you're going to eliminate a certain number of buyers who are really looking to expand their RMR base. Now, if you have a large, for instance, if you have a large two-way video monitoring portion, that could be a plus, but only to somebody who wants to get into the video monitoring space. To somebody to whom that is not attractive for business reasons, they don't want to get involved. And the idea of, well, we'll sell you the standard security and the video monitoring we'll sell to somebody else, complicates the transaction, doesn't do a lot for it. So a lot depends. How close is it to the standard security business? And, I think it does make it a little tougher. The further you move away from the traditional security, these add-on services shrink your potential buyer base.
All right, I think we now have to move on to Ron. All of you should excuse me. I haven't really appropriately introduced everybody, but I think everybody knows all of the speakers, which is probably why you're here. Anyway, I want to introduce Ron now. And Ron, you are now live and transmitting.
Hey, it's terrific to be live, especially where I've been. You all are looking at some of what we call our old-timers ads that we use in emails. And in the next few minutes, you'll probably see 40 or 50 of these. And it's just my way of kind of entertaining you while we go through some of the points that perhaps Barry and Dennis did not cover completely. If you wanted to see my original presentation, all you have to do is look at what Dennis wrote, and you've got it down there exactly the way it is. But let me try and share with you a slightly different perspective. We represent only sellers. We've been doing it for about 13 years. I'm guessing, although I don't know for certain, we've done about 150 or so transactions, and if you want to see who are the ones we can talk about, which are the majority, just go to our website. We literally identify every transaction that we've ever done. Having said that, we have found very frequently and more often than not that the buyers generally fall into several categories. First category is the buyer who is looking to buy rate and will buy anything that legitimately could be a monitoring contract. The more the merrier. There are a significant number of bulk buyers out there, ADT and Monotronics among them. And typically they will pay on a multiple of recurring monthly revenue. And at that point, the multiple is almost always somewhere in the low to mid-30s, occasionally 36, 37, 38 is the highest that I've heard on most transactions. But then there are the strategic buyers. Those buyers are among the top 25 companies in the industry. Mostly they're regional players. Mostly they are well-run companies started by entrepreneurs who have helped build the business and passed on to managers who are effectively running that business today. What they look for is what I would call a tuck-in acquisition to their base of business or a new platform business, which would represent a much larger acquisition that can stand on its own and more than likely justify a branch office. The tuck-in business is the kind of business where if you have a branch office in Chicago and you decide that you want to build up the rate, you will tuck in as many opportunities as you possibly can. On the other hand, if you have a branch that you are looking to establish, at that point it becomes a search, and you look for, or the buyers look for, the very best opportunity they can find. And it is here where the price is not so much important as is the acquisition and gaining a presence in a market that has been clearly identified by the buyer. And this is where a number of people hear about multiples and can't understand why when they're hearing things in the upper 30s, 40s, sometimes even 50, they don't understand why they can't be offered the same amount of rate. And I recall back when Jim Covert sold HSM to Stanley, and it was announced that a 60-time multiple was paid for that bulk of business, and within days we had dozens of phone calls from alarm dealers who wanted to know if we could get them a 60-time multiple. The truth is we never did, never told them we would, and to the best of my knowledge, nobody has ever paid that amount for a book of recurring monthly revenue. However, right now, as a matter of fact, we're handling a transaction which is a stock sale, not an asset sale, and that means that the buyer is accepting some liabilities that are not normally accepted, and typically when that happens, the purchase multiple is reduced dramatically, and in this case we're getting a number that's north of 40 times for a stock sale, and we are doing it for what amounts to somewhere in the $50,000 a month of recurring monthly revenue. This is almost unheard of, and you would think that it was something that we did that was extraordinary, and the reality of it is the buyer knew what he had to do in order to do the transaction, agreed to it, and now we're probably a month, 6 weeks away from closing the transaction. Everybody's happy, everybody's working well together, and what the buyer is getting is an extraordinarily strong platform company. So those are a couple of the things that enter into it, and I suspect as you're looking around for who you would like to have represent you, there's a couple of factors. You're going to be living with this person or this group of people for some period of time, and frankly, you need to be comfortable with them. If you're comfortable in the initial conversations, the chances are it'll be comfortable later on. If you're not, you probably ought to do yourself and the other side, the broker, a favor and say, look, this is just not for me. I think I'm going to go somewhere else. And that happens. Everybody understands it. But if you're comfortable with the broker and he is going to or she is going to help you package your business in a way that is going to represent your company and who you are most effectively to potential buyers. When that happens, it's very much akin to what happens when a real estate broker packages up a home for sale. They want to make sure that potential buyers see the most important attributes, minimize what might be some of the less desirable attributes, and in effect show a winning project to a prospective buyer. That's what a broker will do also. So in the process of doing it, we actually go through an evaluation of your company. We make sure that you and we are in agreement as to the range of valuation, and we make certain that in the agreement that we will both sign, that range is clearly identified in the agreement so that there's never a misunderstanding about what was committed to or, for that matter, what was accepted. Typically, a transaction takes anywhere from the shortest I've heard, believe it or not, was 10 days. I think we did it the end of a year in 2005, and it was an emergency, but we got it done the last 10 days of the year. The longest is the one we're doing now that is the C Corp, and that's been going on for the better part of 3 years. So anywhere between 10 days and 3 years is the range, but typically it's 90 to 120 days, start to finish. And the one thing that you will almost always say at the very end of the process, and this is the thought I will leave you with, every time a sale is closed, a transfer of money has taken place, a celebration dinner has been had, and you were to ask the seller, what's the one thought that predominates your thinking or is at the forefront of your thinking now? And they will always come back and say, I wish I had known my company as well before today as I know it today. And that is the reality of good management. If you prepare for the future, you'll never be unprepared. Know your company, understand what your strengths are, and make sure that the people you're dealing with are comfortable for you and that they will do the things that they say they will do. Our names, our address are on your screen right now. If you'd like to be on our mailing list to get those old timers ads, we put them out about once a week based on the number of opt-outs we get on a monthly basis. 99.4% of you seem to enjoy getting them, so if you do like them, let us know and we'll make sure you're on our mailing list. And with that, I'll turn it back to Ken.
Ron, before we let you off the hook, can you tell us what the market is like now? Are you still there? Ron? I guess we'll have to turn to Jim now, Jim Worcester, and he's on the finance side. Jim, are you ready to roll?
Sure, ready to go, Ken.
Okay, 1 second. We're going to put your PowerPoint up. Still have a packed house. I think
all right.
How runs. Okay, Jim, you're up.
Okay, well, my name is Jim Worcester. I'm the president of Alarm Financial Services, and I am going to, I guess, talk about something that's very different than the previous speakers had spoken about, and that is borrowing money rather than preparing for or selling your company. So that's very different. However, ironically, borrowing money may be one of the things that is the most significant factor in you improving the value of your company when you do decide to sell it. And that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, you may be borrowing money to grow your company, and so therefore increase the value because it's a larger company when it comes time to sell. And as Dennis pointed out, the size of the RMR base that you have is one of the biggest contributors to the multiple that you're able to get. But perhaps more significantly, and this picks up on something that Ron ended with, perhaps more significantly is the fact that going through the process of getting a loan actually leads to that situation that Ron mentioned where you look closely at your company perhaps for the very first time. The questions that we're going to ask as a lender, as a potential lender, the things that we're going to ask you to prepare for us, the reports, the analysis, et cetera, it really cause you to focus on the metrics and the performance elements of your business, and when in doing so, are going to put you in a position where you're going to want to improve those and maximize those. And not only are those going to result in improving your ability to get a loan, but they're going to improve the value of your company when you go to sell it sometime. If we could go back one slide, you got a little bit ahead of me there. Thanks. So just by way of background, what my company does is we provide term loans, lines of credits. We also do acquisitions. But I'm going to talk today specifically about the loans. And our funding is anywhere from $20,000 up to $2 million. So we would be considered at the smaller end of the market, small to medium size. We work with companies that have RMR maybe up to about $150,000. Okay, let's keep going from there to the next slide. Thanks. So Dennis broke down the value that may be attributed to different types of RMR and how some may be more valuable than others. And the same holds true from a lender's perspective. You know, we're an RMR lender. That's our specific niche. We're an RMR lender. We only lend to security alarm companies, fire alarm companies, video monitoring companies, and we do all our lending based on RMR. Now, obviously, there's all types of RMR. And so we're going to really sit down with the borrower, potential borrower, and try to break down the different types of RMR that they have and try to assign some value to those so that then we know how much we can lend that company. A lot of the things we'll already know. We already understand the profit margins that are going to be associated with fire and burg monitoring. Some of the other ones, though, you know, we're not going to know how profitable your test and inspection RMR is, or your managed access RMR, or your service contract RMR. So really, this places the onus on the alarm company to have a really good handle on what their profit margins are for each of the different types of RMR that they have. If you have RMR for service contracts and you really just break even, then a lender or a buyer aren't really going to place a ton of value in those. They're going to have value because they help you reduce your attrition by having a more locked-in relationship with your customers, so that's certainly good. But in terms of improving the amount of RMR that you get a multiple against, whether it's a lending multiple or a purchase multiple, break even isn't really going to get you very far. So again, if you rely on the lender to come in or a buyer to come in and figure out what those margins are, you're putting your future, your destiny in their hands. And my recommendation is to put it in your own hands and spend some time trying to really understand what your areas of profit are on each of your different types of RMR. Let's go to the next slide. So when a lender looks for, really it's pretty straightforward. We look to see if you have a strong management team. We look to see if you've got financial reports. We look to see if you have a business plan, if you really have sat down and on a go-forward basis have projected numbers out as to where you think you'll be next quarter and next year and the year after. We look at your history, certainly when we're trying to establish things like attrition rate, et cetera. And we look at key metrics that are the same thing that a buyer would look at: attrition, profit margin, creation cost. How much money does it cost you to put on a new customer, to add a new customer? Let's go to the next slide, please. And so when we come to work with an alarm company, we're going to have two different perspectives as a lender. We're a cash flow-based lender. In other words, we're going to ask the question, how will this loan be repaid? And so it's incumbent upon the borrower, the alarm company, to have thought that through. Okay, I'm borrowing $200,000. I'm buying out my partner. Great. Now how am I going to repay that loan? Well, my partner was taking a salary, so I'll have some cash flow from that, et cetera, et cetera. But you really have to have thought this through and be able to explain that to the borrower. And we're also an asset-based lender. In other words, we have to say, okay, well, what's the stuff worth? What is the company that we're lending to? What are their assets? That's the collateral for the loan. And what is it worth if we have to sell it? So we're going to take two different perspectives. And it's important that a potential borrower understand the perspective that a lender has coming to the table. Next slide, please. And we also would recommend that you kind of think a little bit before engaging with a lender or as you start the process out. And they're going to want to know, how are you going to use the money? They're going to want to know that by hearing the story of your growth plans or your use of the capital plans. And they're also going to want to see some numbers to back that up. They're going to want to know how you're going to be able to repay the loan. And then they're also going to want to know, hey, if worse comes to worse, how can the lender get out of the loan? Which means if there was a default situation, worst case scenario, and they had to sell accounts, et cetera, how could that take place? And then you're going to want to be able to tell the lender, what will the lender do if you can't pay? And it's amazing how many times I ask these questions, the last two questions, and people say, oh, well, that'll never happen. Don't worry, you won't have to worry about it. We'll always be there. We'll always pay. We've always been there in the past. And a word of advice, that's not what the lender wants to hear. They want to hear that you have prepared for worst case scenario, and you're able to explain to the lender, hey, worst case scenario, here's how you're going to get your money back. Next slide, please. So, really just in summary, I just want to say that a lot of the process that that's involved in borrowing money from a company like ours or another lender in the alarm industry, or just a general commercial lender, your traditional bank, a lot of what goes into the process is going to prepare you to better position you for someday when you decide to sell. We're going to really ask a lot of the same questions that a buyer is going to ask. And so, I think by by going through the process of raising money, or even just talking to lenders to see what the process entails, you're going to learn a lot about what ultimately will put you in the best position to sell your company down the road. So my contact information is here, and certainly happy to answer any questions if you want to take them offline. And thanks very much for your attention today.
Jim, before you run off, could you tell us what's the difference between borrowing from a traditional bank and borrowing from a lender like AFS that specializes in the alarm industry?
Okay. Yeah, sure. In some ways, it's similar insofar as the loan itself. If you look at the loan documents, how the loan is structured in terms of having an interest rate and being amortized and paid off over a period of time. In that regard, it's going to look very, very similar. However, a company that specializes in the industry like AFS, we already know your business. I mean, we don't know the particulars of your company, but we already know your business. So you don't have to spend a lot of time educating us like you would a bank. A bank has to know all kinds of different industries and different businesses. And the idea that they would have any kind of, if they're just a general commercial bank or your local traditional bank, they're not going to necessarily understand it. You're going to spend a lot of time educating them, and then at the end of the day, you might not be able to get the loan. With us, we already come into the table already understanding how the dynamics of your company work and how your industry works, and so we're going to hit the ground running, and it's probably going to be a much more efficient process.
And just one other, is the loan application and due diligence process complicated and drawn out?
It's not, again, I think because of what I just mentioned, Ken, and that is that we already understand how a security alarm company works. And so we're going to be pretty efficient with the process. We know what questions to ask, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on things that are not really important. So as a result, the process is pretty efficient, and generally we can put a loan in place in anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I want to remind everybody that the next webinar is on June 27th, and it's going to be covering all your contractual needs using the all-in-ones. I'm going to be giving that presentation. The next valuation webinar is July 11th, and we're going to have a panel of Barry Epstein, Mitch Reitman, Ray Lynn, and again Dennis Stern. I'll keep him to his 10 minutes. And I want to let everyone know, because everyone likes to know, yes, we had a packed house today, and I appreciate everybody signing in and listening and staying with us throughout this webinar, and I hope that it was worthwhile for you, and I hope the panelists enjoyed participating, and I thank you all very much.